The clock struck midnight, but Ethan sat frozen on the worn-out couch, his mind spiraling. The apartment was silent except for the humming refrigerator and the occasional honk from the street below. Crumpled job applications lay scattered on the coffee table, and unopened college brochures were shoved into a corner. He had tried, applied to scholarships, sent resumes, worked part-time, but nothing seemed to go his way. His single mother was working the night shift at the diner again. He hated seeing her come home exhausted, her hands aching, feet swollen, eyes tired, and yet, no matter how much he tried to help, it felt like he was drowning in disappointment. Ethan clenched his jaw, whispering into the quiet, "What's the point anymore? Nothing changes." From the kitchen doorway, a raspy voice broke the silence. "You sound like I did, 60 years ago." Ethan turned to see his grandfather, William Carter, leaning on his cane, his eyes calm but knowing. "I didn't know you were still awake," Ethan said, wiping his face. "I'm always awake when the house is heavy with silence." William replied, "Come with me, son. There's something I want you to see." Ethan followed his grandfather out to the backyard. The air was cold, and the grass crunched beneath their feet. At the far end of the yard stood a shed, forgotten by time. Its wooden frame leaned slightly, vines crawling up one side. William pushed the creaky door open, revealing dust, covered tools, wooden scraps, and a lingering scent of sawdust and old memories. In the far corner stood a workbench, aged but sturdy. "This," William said, slowly stepping inside, "was my sanctuary, my place of rebuilding, after I lost my job, after I lost your grandmother, after I came back from war with a leg I didn't recognize, and a heart I didn't know how to fix." Ethan glanced around, confused. "You used to build stuff, not just stuff," William said, walking over to a shelf. He pulled down a small wooden clock, its edges imperfect, its paint faded, but still ticking. "This was my first piece. Took me 3 weeks. I sold it for $20. Ethan looked at the old clock, then at his grandfather's weathered hands. "Why didn't you ever tell me this?" "Because pain doesn't always like to speak, and some lessons." William paused, are better seen than told. The next morning, Ethan woke up earlier than usual. Something about that shed stayed with him. After breakfast, he walked out back and peeked into the workshop again. William was already there, smoothing out a wooden plank. "Thought you might come," he said with a grin. "What are we building?" Ethan asked. "A birdhouse," William replied. Simple, but full of meaning. Over the next few weeks, they worked side by side. William taught him how to measure carefully, to sand with patience, to trust the grain of the wood. But more than that, he spoke of life, the kind of wisdom that only comes from struggle. "I was told I'd never walk properly again," William said one day, adjusting his prosthetic leg. "That I'd never provide for my family again, but I figured, if I can't walk fast, I'll walk steady. If I can't lift heavy, I'll lift smart." Ethan smiled, starting to understand. It wasn't just about wood. It was about building something from nothing, something steady, something that mattered. Slowly, the birdhouse took shape, and with it, so did Ethan's confidence. One afternoon, after painting it together, William placed the birdhouse proudly on a tree outside. "It's not about perfection," he said, "it's about heart." 2 months later, the local community held its annual fair. There was a handmade crafts contest, and William urged Ethan to enter. "I don't know." Ethan hesitated. "I'm not a professional." "Neither was I," William said, "but you've got something most professionals don't, soul." So Ethan spent days building. He recreated the clock William had once built, but added his own flair, sleek edges, modern touches, and a small engraving at the back. For those who build when it's hardest to stand, they named the piece Legacy. At the fair, Ethan set the clock on a small table with trembling hands. Dozens of booths surrounded him, beautiful, polished, corporate-looking designs, but slowly, people started to stop by his table. They touched the wood, read the engraving, smiled. Near the end of the day, a man in his 50s approached Ethan and asked, "You make this yourself?" "Yes, sir," Ethan replied nervously. The man introduced himself as Mr. Alan, the owner of a custom furniture business, he offered Ethan a part-time position on the spot and mentorship in design and craftsmanship. "I see potential in you," Mr. Allen said, "not just talent, but the kind of story people connect with." Ethan stood speechless. He turned to his grandfather, who was watching from a distance, eyes glistening. As the sun set over the fairgrounds, Ethan hugged him tightly. "You didn't just teach me how to build wood," he whispered. "You taught me how to build a life." 5 years later, the small shed had transformed into a full-fledged workshop. A sign hung above the door, "Carter and grandson, handmade with heart." Ethan, now in his mid-20s, moved with confidence, his hands stained with varnish, his heart full of purpose. He had taken night classes in design and worked alongside Mr. Allen, but the soul of his work came from those quiet moments in the shed with his grandfather. One rainy afternoon, a young teenage boy walked into the shop. His clothes were worn, his eyes anxious. "You hiring?" he asked quietly. Ethan looked up from his workbench and saw something familiar in the boy, something he'd seen in his own reflection years ago. "Maybe," Ethan replied with a smile. "But first, come with me." He led the boy to a shelf at the back of the workshop. There sat the birdhouse, the very first project he built with his grandfather. "This was where everything began," he said. "My grandfather taught me to believe in small steps, that even broken hands can build, even broken hearts can heal." The boy stared at the birdhouse, then at Ethan. "Would you teach me?" he asked. Ethan nodded. "That's why I'm here." Outside, the rain continued to fall, but inside the workshop, hope was being carved once more, by hands willing to try and hearts ready to believe. From struggle to success, Ethan's story wasn't about luck. It was about love passed down through action, about a grandfather's quiet strength becoming a young man's foundation, and how one act of patience can shape generations, because sometimes the most powerful legacy we can leave is the wisdom we share when someone is about to give up.